Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Astro Consciousness channel. I'm Millie, and I am here to give you your forecast for the week of September 2nd through the 8th. In this channel, we talk about the astrology of the week ahead and how you can integrate it into your personal and spiritual growth. Before we begin, you guys, Astro Consciousness, the new website is live, and so is the Eclipse Guide. Now, please note that when you go and make your purchase for the Eclipse Guide, the checkout is going to say purchase membership. You are not purchasing a membership. You are purchasing a one-time purchase guide. We are currently working with Squarespace on that wording, but you are not committing yourself to a membership. This is a one-time guide purchase, which you will have access to forever and ever. I am so excited about this Eclipse guide. You're going to find 6 lessons. You're going to find also guided meditations along with the workbook, which I know is going to just help guide you through this eclipse season. So remember, you are not purchasing a membership. You are making a one-time purchase. Okay, so with that said, let's recap where we are coming from in order to understand where we are headed. So on Sunday, September 1st, we are experiencing 2 major planets doing 2 major things. The first is that we are experiencing Uranus starting its retrograde motion, and it's going to remain retrograde till January 30th, 2025, okay? So what does it mean when Uranus goes retrograde? Well, collectively, Uranus rules the collective. Uranus rules society. Uranus rules groups of people. In Taurus, Uranus retrograde between now and January 30th is going to make great readjustments to things around finances. So I wouldn't be surprised if we heard things around rent control, if there was a lot of talk around the economy, especially because we're going to be in the middle of election season. I would not be surprised if we saw some layoffs between now and the end of the year. So that's more on the collective side. What does this mean for us on a personal level? When Uranus goes retrograde, considering the fact that Mercury, the planet of cognitive thought, the planet of how we communicate and think to ourselves and then express those thoughts to others, has been connecting with Uranus, this planet of thinking outside the box, doing things differently, changing our minds, changing our belief systems, changing the way that we see ourselves and that we see life. Uranus retrograde is so that we get accustomed to this new way of thinking, this new way of communicating. So here are a few examples. Let's say that during Mercury retrograde in August, you decided that you were going to do mindset work, right? Or you simply decided, I don't want to think that way about myself anymore. I don't want to have such negative thoughts about myself. I don't want to be mean to myself anymore. I don't want to have perhaps a defeatist, right, mental way of thinking. Okay, so that's Mercury, the thoughts that you have. The connection to Uranus is the desire and the willingness to say, there has to be another way. There has to be another way that I speak to myself, that I think about myself, of what I believe possible. That's Uranus, because you're thinking outside of your box, right? Now, Uranus retrograde between now and the end of January is so that you can practice those new thoughts, right? And so it might look like actual mindset work with a coach, or it can just look like you becoming much more mindful of the words that you use to communicate to yourself. And between now and then, you actually creating new belief systems in your mind about yourself. Another way that this can manifest, especially because we are now technically in eclipse season, is that there is a different way of communicating between you and your most important or personal relationships. Perhaps there were important or difficult conversations that were had between the end of July through the month of August and into September, that with Uranus retrograde between now and the end of January, you two are learning how to communicate differently, how to better your communication, how to prioritize the relationship in a different way. This is a big deal to understand, because I always like to remind you that when astrological events take place and there's something in our life that changes and that shifts, there are certain number of months, there's a certain amount of time that follows for us to actually integrate all of that. And Uranus is about that. Essentially, Uranus is about us integrating that which we have chosen to do differently. And take notice as to when Uranus is going retrograde. Uranus is going retrograde September 1st, which is right at the beginning of eclipse season. What this tells me when I look out into the next couple of months is that whatever happens in eclipse season is going to really dictate a lot of things for us, and that they're going to feel very different, very outside of our box. It's probably going to make us a little uncomfortable. We're probably going to have to be a little brave around certain things, a little courageous around certain things. And the adjustment of Uranus is getting our bodies and our nervous system up to date to that. So whenever we experience growth and expansion, whenever we make a decision that is vastly different than the ones we've made in the past, that's growth. There's expansion. The body is only used to a certain level of growth and expansion. So when we make decisions that are really out of the air quotes ordinary for us, the body, the nervous system is not accustomed to that. So Uranus retrograde in Taurus will be about us settling in, settling our bodies in to a different way of being in our relationships, of communicating out in the world, of thinking out, of thinking of ourselves, of perceiving the world, of even a different relationship with money, if that's the case. So because Uranus is this planet that can feel so out of our control, it's important to understand that this is how it can manifest in a personal, at a personal level. Now, does it take intention to really adjust to a Uranus retrograde? I think yes and no. And here's what I mean by that. I think the adjustment that we're going to have to make to this Uranus retrograde is going to come very naturally. So we may set the intention, for instance, to have more positive thoughts, better thoughts about ourselves, but I think that it's going to happen anyway. But when we are aware of it and we're working with the energy, that's how we meet the universe halfway. Okay, another thing that's happening September 1st is that Pluto, currently retrograde, Pluto, the planet of transformation, currently retrograde, is moving back into the sign of Capricorn. Pluto will be at the 29th degree of Capricorn throughout the entire eclipse season. Look, Pluto's final pass through Capricorn is going to bring stuff up that we're going to really have to finalize, that we're really going to have to say, no more of that, no more relating in that way, no more self-abandoning, no more betraying myself, no more being so flexible with my boundaries or overly flexible with my boundaries. There is an element of all or nothing with this final retrograde of Pluto going into Capricorn. But this isn't something to feel afraid of. I really think that because we have experienced Pluto in Capricorn at those very last degrees of Capricorn for now about 4 to 5 years, we understand what this is asking of us. We understand that there is a significant way of being that no longer fits us. So here's a really simple way of understanding this. Think of who you were, think of how you functioned in the world back in 2019 and 2020. Okay, who were you then? How were you functioning then? What did your relationships look like then? The foundations of your life, your career, your home, your health. Okay. Now think about how that's different. So much of what's different now in your life in comparison to 2019 and 2020, so many things, so many fears that you had to face in order to be who you are now have to do with Pluto in Capricorn. And so that's a really big overview, but I'm doing it in this way so that you understand what's actually happening here. My point with painting this example for you is so that you understand that Pluto moving back into Capricorn for one last time is not something to be necessarily fear, because we already have experience with it. We understand what we've been working with. Now, is this last pass going to bring some final turning points, some final understandings? Yes, but can we set the intention to be empowered by that rather than being afraid and disempowered by it? So here's what I mean. Okay, let's say that you've had some difficulty with an important relationship in your life this year. Okay, this final pass of Pluto retrograde in Capricorn for the next couple of weeks is about, we are going to define how you and I are going to move forward from this point on. We're going to establish some very clear boundaries. And if those are not met, then I'm willing to walk away from you. So do you notice how in that example, there's a sense of definitiveness? It's this or nothing. There is an element of this or nothing. Okay, now let's say that you're the one who has to have that conversation or make that decision. It isn't going to feel as heavy as it may have earlier this year or even last year or the year before. Why? Because remember, the person who you are now is vastly different than the person who you were a few years ago. And perhaps the person of a few years ago had a lot of difficulty setting strong boundaries, but now you don't. And so this Pluto, this Pluto retrograde in Capricorn is going to show you, this is what I no longer want in my life. I can no longer do this in my life. Okay, let's find a different example. Let's say that it's a bad habit. You have a habit of procrastinating, right? And in this final pass of Pluto retrograde in Capricorn, you really see how procrastination is perhaps a form of self-sabotage, right? Now, this isn't about beating yourself up. This isn't about, having, again, negative thoughts about yourself. This is simply about coming to the acceptance of, I no longer want to put myself in this situation. And the final pass of Pluto in Capricorn really cuts that habit. So I'm trying to give you as many examples as possible, because Pluto, not only is it the planet of transformation and external transformation, but in order for external transformations to take place, transformation of the psyche also takes place. And that's what Pluto represents as well. It represents the deep psyche. There is something that has shifted so significantly in the way that we think, in the way that we communicate, in what we believe, that those beliefs and those thoughts are going to begin to manifest outwardly between now and the next year. So this Pluto's last pass over Capricorn becomes that significant, okay? So I hope you have a better grasp as to what this is. And if these examples aren't your examples specifically, take the themes of the examples and apply them to your own life and to whatever may be happening for you internally or externally at this point in time. With that said, let's get started with the week. Monday, September 2nd, we have the new moon in Virgo. So I left you a lesson for that new moon in Virgo last week. I left you an additional lesson with a lot more detail and a lot more important facts in the eclipse guide of this new moon in Virgo. So I'm not going to talk about it too much, but here's one more thing I will say. This new moon in Virgo is going to really give us this desire of wanting to know things now, of wanting to get clear now, of wanting to have certain conversations now. We've prolonged this long enough. We have done this long enough. It will bring a sense of urgency because Mercury has just gone direct, and Mercury is the ruler of Virgo. Virgo is about wanting to know the details, wanting to know the steps, wanting to know where we're headed. So be very mindful of that because not everyone will be able to meet you. And if you are ready to have certain conversations, to have certain answers, and not everyone is just yet ready to meet you, that can cause a lot of frustration. And so much of beginning this eclipse season, and one of the greatest lessons of this eclipse season, is about acceptance, acceptance of where you are and acceptance of where others are. And so to become incredibly frustrated by someone else not having an answer that you want now, you're still relying on someone else to feel better about a situation when you can come back to yourself and say, you know what I know. They'll meet me when they're ready. Now, when it comes to perhaps like work environments or things like that, this week and this new moon in Virgo can bring some frustrations. So you just want to make sure that communication is clear. You want to make sure that all of the things are looked at, all of the details are looked at, because this new moon in Virgo is about teaching you that, is about teaching you how to, in a very practical way, perhaps plan a little better, plan ahead, again, have better communication. So it is a new moon that is going to teach us a lot, but that can bring some frustration as the week unfolds. Tuesday, September 3rd, we have Mars in Gemini at 29 degrees, creating a square to Neptune in Pisces. So this is an energy that at the beginning of the week might feel a little disorienting. This is an energy that at the beginning of the week, as we are experiencing this very strong and potent Virgo energy, we're wanting to move forward, we're wanting to know answers, we're wanting to get really organized. And then we have this energy that's a little bit disorienting where we want that, but we don't know exactly how to get that. That can create some frustration, okay? So you want to be very, very mindful about the fact that we are already experiencing eclipse energy. And one of the things that I talk a lot about in the eclipse guide is so much of this energy is outside of our control, because eclipse seasons are a time where the ego takes a step back and it's time for the soul to come through and experience the lessons that it signed up for. Now, why does this matter on any given Tuesday? Because we have to remember that whenever we experience any kind of delay, whenever we have this feeling of rushing into something or understanding something now, and we just don't have that, it's because we're not meant to have it yet. There is information that we are still missing. Mars in Gemini, square Neptune in Pisces. There is a lack of clarity in direction. Mars in Gemini, especially at the 29th degree, once it feels like I have so many options, I'm kind of feeling overwhelmed and I don't know what to do. And if that's the way you're feeling, come back to yourself. In the Eclipse Guide, I added a daily short grounding meditation. It's only 8 minutes long. That is to come back to the self so that you can allow these things to transpire as they may. Wednesday, September 4th. You're really going to want to pay attention to this day for two reasons. We have the moon transiting the sign of Libra and coming into conjunction to the south node in Libra. And we also have Venus in Libra conjunct the south node. So there's a triple conjunction between the moon, which represents and rules the way that we feel, the way that we process emotion, how we feel emotionally safe, in this case, in relationships. Conjunct the south node in Libra, which is about this is what I am changing in the way that I relate, and perhaps some relationships that I may be leaving behind. And Venus in Libra, which is the epitome of relationships. So here we have this triple conjunction about a month before the actual eclipse in Libra. You want to pay attention to this day. And this isn't just about one day. I think that this energy will be really active between Wednesday, Thursday, maybe the first half of Friday, but you'll want to pay attention to Wednesday the 4th and Thursday the 5th, because the moon transiting the sign of Libra, and depending on the conversations that you have on those days or perhaps throughout this entire week, are going to give you a glimpse as to what you might be releasing or changing, or perhaps even starting anew in a really positive way in a relationship, but that it's going to make the relationship look very different. And this is the beauty of following the transit of the moon, that every single month the moon transits every single sign. And it just so happens that the moon is transiting the sign of Libra this month. It's activating the south node, which is such a part of that solar eclipse in Libra of October 2nd. And it's asking you, what are you noticing about your relationships, and how does that make you feel? How are you different now? How are you showing up? How are people showing up for you? Is it still the same patterns? Have things changed? So this is a really important time for you to pay attention to that. Another thing happening is that Mars is ingressing into the sign of Cancer. Usually, it takes Mars about 6 weeks to transit an entire sign. And when Mars enters a particular sign, this is the call to what direction am I headed in this part of my life, in this part of my chart? What am I defending? What am I fighting for? Is there conflict? How can I look at that conflict? How can I deal with that conflict? Okay, Mars in Cancer is going to remain there till April of 2025. That is a really long time. Why is it going to remain there for so long? Because Mars is going to retrograde. So what does that mean to us? Whenever any planet goes retrograde in a sign, it means that we are retracing something, we are reconsidering something, we are redoing something. But Mars in Cancer, for that amount of time, Mars in Cancer represents, what am I defending that actually matters to me, that I actually care about, that who am I defending that feels like family, right? How am I defending my home? How am I defending my sense of family? How am I protecting, defending my inner child? This is so much that we are going to be going back and forth with. I would not be surprised if during this Mars in Cancer period, especially, I mean, really between now and at least through February of 2025, there is conflict in family, right? But this is mine. No, but this is mine, but this is yours. History. Cancer represents family history, ancestry. Mars represents how we are in conflict with that, or how we are fighting that together, or fighting against each other. Mars in Cancer can also represent passive aggressiveness. I don't know how much room, based on the astrology, between now and at least till the end of the year, but into February of 2025, I don't think there's going to be much room for passive aggressiveness, because there is so much active energy of aggression, of assertiveness, of moving forward, of expressing ourselves, that I don't necessarily think this Mars in Cancer is going to represent that. I think this Mars in Cancer is going to represent so much more of, I am protecting myself. I am protecting my emotional processing. I am protecting myself so that I can feel safe in this world, so that I can feel safe around this group of people. Here's another thing that can happen, especially during eclipse season. The unwillingness to remain in spaces or in groups of people or even in family Cancer that no longer feels resonant with us, and kind of having to assert ourselves for ourselves. I think Mars in Cancer is going to bring a lot more inner child work, and us really honoring that inner child work. But I do find it very interesting that it's there for such a long time. And so there's something there that the universe is trying to tell us, look, this is worth fighting for. Another thing I want to leave you with that I think is very important is that, especially if you have been having a tough time in relationships, the Mars retrograde can actually be a time for repair. Because what we begin to realize is that there are things, there are relationships worth saving. But because of everything else happening around that Mars in Cancer and then that Mars retrograde, it's going to look very differently. And that's what we have to be okay with. Mars in Cancer is going to also call for a different level of vulnerability with others. And so it's going to be an interesting transit, but I think that what it's really getting us to the core of is what truly matters to me, and how am I going to really honor that from this point forward. So it's going to be an interesting transit. Now, the energy that takes us into the weekend of the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th is the final square of Mercury in Leo to Uranus in Taurus. I have talked to you all about this square over the last couple of weeks, especially during the Mercury retrograde. The first square between Mercury in Leo and Uranus in Taurus was on July 21st. Then we had the second square between August 17th and 18th, depending on your time zone. And that just happened to be the halfway point of the Mercury retrograde, where the Sun and Mercury came together, where there was an illumination, right? And here we have the third square between Mercury and Uranus, which is technically taking place either the 6th or the 7th, but this energy expands through the weekend, because it is in this weekend that we're going to come to the understanding of what that entire retrograde story was about. Remember, I have said this is the beginning, the middle, and the end. The beginning was July 21st. The middle was August 17th or 18th. And this is the end of the story. So far more than just gaining new information, gaining shocking news. I think collectively we might see shocking news, but at a personal level, this is all about how your story of these three squares, how it's unfolding for you. I think that this is going to really let people know, each of us individually, what that Mercury retrograde was actually about for us. Remember, it's a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so we've already been involved in this story. We have been following our own story. We have been processing things in our thoughts. And remember, whenever Mercury and Uranus meet, Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. Uranus is like Mercury's uncle who has had a lot of life experience and is here to teach little Mercury something new. It's here to teach little Mercury how to navigate the world differently. This is, I think, this has a lot to do with changing our mindset, with a shift in the way that we think about ourselves, in what we believe is possible for us. Because as I've been saying, with Mercury and Leo, this is about creating Leo, our reality, through thought, Mercury. And so we've been chipping away at certain belief systems. We've been chipping away at certain thought patterns. And what we come to realize now is, oh, I'm not that. I can dream bigger. I can have more. This redirection, this change in course is actually something that's good for me. I didn't expect the things that happened in August, perhaps, and this is also another thing that's really important, that depending on what you experienced in August in particular, with this final square between Mercury and Uranus, there's a different appreciation for what went down. There's a different appreciation in that, you know what, I can only control so much. And I trust where my path is taking me. Because remember, earlier this week, Mars in Gemini is creating a square to Neptune in Pisces. There isn't a clear direction yet, but what this Mercury square Uranus can bring is a different way of thinking about our situation, where perhaps we are grateful for it, or we have a different understanding of what our process is teaching us. You guys, this week, this first week of September comes with a lot. I think that we are experiencing different energies from different directions. I mean, talk about really being catapulted into an eclipse season. I will repeat once again, when you go purchase your Eclipse guide, you are not purchasing a membership. It is just a one-time purchase. As I mentioned earlier in the recording, we are working with Squarespace to change that wording, but when you go finalize your purchase, you're really just purchasing the guide, not a membership. And I will still be here week after week on YouTube, continuing to talk about all of this. I cannot wait to hear your experiences, what you think about the guide, how everything lands for you. I am so, so excited. As always, may this be of service. So much love to you, and I will talk to you next week.